is Colin Liddell, and this is the Shortpod, a brief and succinct podcast commenting on the events and issues of the day. And today it is the 10th of November, 2023. Next year, 2024, is going to be a major electoral year. This includes elections in America, elections in Europe, elections in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. The elections I'm most interested in are, of course, the US election and the UK election. In the UK, the governing Conservative Party is trailing the opposition Labour Party by something like 20 points. And they are struggling desperately to become more popular. In fact, you could say that they're veering into populism. But by doing so, I fear that they have run into a kind of paradox, as most of their populist rhetoric is being produced by the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She's at the forefront of the populist fight against illegal migration, for example. She's also been making statements about homeless people, welfare cheats, and other red meat subject matter that appeals to Conservative voters. This is because the Conservative Party is so far behind Labour, not because Labour is so popular, but because Conservative voters are just not turning up to vote. But there is a problem, as I said, with the Conservative Party's swerve towards populism. And that problem is that A, it's controversial, and B, it's brown. Now, the Conservative Party is in the awkward position of having over-browned itself when they put Rishi Sunak in as Prime Minister. In Britain, which is a very unracist country, nobody really minds a bit of brown. But I think there is a noticeable cultural trend to kind of turn down the brown, so to speak. I think you can see this partly reflected in the Christmas ads for this year, which are a lot less brown-centric than they have been in the past. Now, it's very important for major British political parties to have a bit of brown, to show that they are inclusive, to show that black people, Asian people, etc., are part of their target demographic. But the downside of brown in the party is that you kind of also alienate a lot of white voters. And this is something that the Conservative Party is apparently suffering from. Because, in my opinion, Rishi Sunak has not really been doing that much wrong for a mainstream politician. By definition, of course, all mainstream politicians are flawed. But among mainstream politicians, Rishi's been doing a relatively good job. Suella Braverman, as Home Secretary, is saying the right things about a lot of issues as well. But the problem is that when people think of the Conservative Party, the image that comes into their head is a brown party. So a lot of white Conservative voters are not particularly inspired by that. Now, the brownness of the Conservative Party is constantly emphasised, not just by the fact that Rishi, the Prime Minister, the most prominent figure in the government, is brown, but that the most prominent and noisy minister is also brown. Every 5 minutes on social media, on the news agenda, we have Suella Braverman's name popping up again and again. And so the Conservative Party is kind of trapped into a kind of brown pocket. And this is, in my opinion, what's kind of really not alienating its voters, but it's just undermining their enthusiasm. There are, of course, a lot of white ministers in the Conservative Party, but unfortunately, very few of them are getting headlines. They're not courting controversy. They're not dealing with incendiary issues like Suella Braverman is. So I think there's probably some kind of realization that Suella Braverman is the wrong person to be Home Secretary, because going into the election, she's going to be at the forefront of a lot of these controversial issues. And the unwitting effect of that is going to be to brown up the Conservative Party. And if you're brown at the election, then I think you're going to go down. Now, Labour, by contrast, Labour has a lot of brown people in it. It appeals to brown people. But they also realise that if you turn up the brown, it's going to have a negative effect. So they've done the opposite to the Conservative Party, even though they're actually, in many senses, a browner party than the Tories. They've kind of turned down the brownness. And so when you see Labour or stories about Labour, it's usually a white face that you see, which is quite the opposite to the Conservatives. So these kind of basic valiance issues tend to be what decide elections. And right now, I have to conclude that Labour are fighting a much cleverer election campaign than the Conservative Party. Now, the only thing that Rishi can do is to get rid of Suella Braverman as fast as possible. But then that's also going to be a problem, because when you have a white Home Secretary involved in these hot button topics, you're going to inevitably have accusations of white racism. So I think the Tories have kind of painted themselves into a rather brown corner, over and out.